Welcome back to the Sleepy Stoic Sanctuary, where ancient wisdom illuminates the pathways through life's most complex challenges. Tonight, we walk with Theseus through the greatest maze ever conceived, not just the stone labyrinth of Crete, but the labyrinth of strategic thinking, moral courage, and the wisdom to know that every complex problem has a solution if we approach it with the right preparation and guidance. This is not merely a tale of monsters and heroes. This is the blueprint for navigating the impossible challenges that life places before us, the kind that cannot be solved through strength alone, but requires strategic thinking, careful preparation, and the humility to seek wisdom from those who have walked these paths before us. In every man's life, there comes a moment when he must enter his own labyrinth, a situation so complex, so dangerous, that there seems to be no way forward and no way back. The labyrinth of career challenges, relationship complexities, financial pressures, moral dilemmas that have no easy answers. Theseus teaches us that the secret to surviving any maze is not to rely on luck or brute force, but to understand that every labyrinth has a center, every problem has a core, and every complex challenge can be unraveled by those wise enough to seek the right thread of wisdom. As you settle into your bed tonight, prepare to learn from a hero who discovered that true courage is not about charging blindly forward, but about strategic thinking, careful preparation, and the wisdom to accept help when it is offered. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let this ancient wisdom guide you toward the sleep of strategic thinkers, those who understand that every maze has an exit for those wise enough to find it. Be calm, be clear, be conscious. Tonight, we learn to navigate life's labyrinth with the thread of ancient wisdom. Take 3 deep breaths with me now. In through your nose, hold for a moment, and release slowly through your mouth. Feel your body beginning to settle into the comfort of your bed. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Release any tension you've been carrying from the day. Your jaw relaxes, your forehead smooths, and your eyes grow heavy with the approach of peaceful sleep. Starting from the crown of your head, imagine a warm, golden light beginning to flow down through your body. This is the light of ancient strategy, the same light that guided Theseus through the impossible maze. Feel it flowing down your forehead, relaxing every muscle in your face. The golden light moves down your neck and shoulders, releasing all tension. Your arms grow heavy and relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress. Your chest rises and falls in a natural, peaceful rhythm. Each breath brings you deeper into the tranquility of strategic minds at rest. feel the warm light flowing down through your torso, relaxing your back, your abdomen, releasing any stress or worry you may have been holding. You are safe here in this moment. You are protected by the wisdom of strategic thinking. The light continues down through your hips and thighs, warming every muscle, encouraging complete relaxation. Your legs grow heavy, sinking into the bed as if they're resting after navigating the most complex challenges. Down through your calves and feet, the golden light completes its journey, leaving you completely relaxed, completely at peace, completely ready to receive the ancient wisdom of strategic courage and intelligent preparation. Your mind grows quiet and receptive, like Theseus standing at the harbor, looking toward the challenge that will define his destiny. You are ready for whatever wisdom this ancient tale of strategy will bring to your dreams. You are grounded in this moment, yet open to the adventures that await in the realm of strategic courage. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready to learn from the trials of heroes, knowing that their strategic wisdom will become your strength. Breathe deeply and let the greatest story of strategic thinking ever told begin. In the golden age of Athens, when heroes walked the earth and gods took interest in mortal affairs, there lived a young man who would become the greatest strategic mind of his generation. But Theseus did not begin his journey knowing of his royal heritage or his destiny to rule. His mother, Aethra, had raised him in the court of his grandfather in Trozen, telling him only that his father had left tokens of his identity beneath a great stone, and that when Theseus grew strong enough to move that stone, he would learn who he truly was. For 16 years, Theseus trained his body and mind, studying not just the arts of war, but the arts of leadership, how to think strategically, how to solve complex problems, how to earn the trust and loyalty of others. Every day, he would attempt to move the stone, not out of pride, but out of a growing sense that his true purpose lay waiting to be discovered. When at last he moved the boulder that had resisted his efforts for so many years, he found beneath it a sword of divine craftsmanship and sandals that had touched the feet of kings. With them came a message from his father, Aegeus, king of Athens. "Come to me, my son, but beware the path. Your cousin Medea waits in my court with poison and ambition, and the road between us is haunted by bandits who kill travelers for sport." But Theseus was not content to take the safe sea route to Athens. He chose instead to walk the dangerous coastal road, not from recklessness, but from strategic thinking. He understood that a prince who would rule must first prove that he can protect his people. Each bandit he defeated, each monster he slew, was a lesson in leadership and a demonstration that he would not ask others to face dangers he would not face himself. By the time he reached Athens, his reputation had preceded him. The people lined the streets to cheer the prince who had made their roads safe again. But his greatest test still lay ahead, not in battle against external enemies, but in the complex political maze of his father's court. Medea, the sorceress who had won Aegeus's love through magical arts, saw immediately that this young hero threatened her position. She whispered poison in the king's ear, suggesting that this stranger claiming to be his son might be an impostor sent by enemies to usurp the throne. Theseus could have revealed his identity immediately, could have shown the sword and sandals that proved his heritage. Instead, he chose a more strategic approach. He would prove his worth through deeds rather than tokens, through character rather than claims. It was then that news arrived that would change everything. The tribute ships from Crete had returned, demanding their terrible price. Every 7 years, the tribute ship arrived from Crete with its black sails and its terrible demand. 14 young Athenians, 7 young men and 7 young women, would be selected by lot to sail to the island kingdom of King Minos, there to be fed to the Minotaur, the bull-headed monster that dwelt in the center of an impossible labyrinth. This tribute was the price of an ancient defeat. Years before, Minos' son had been killed while visiting Athens, and the Cretan king had demanded this blood price as compensation. Athens, unable to resist Crete's naval power, had agreed to the terrible terms rather than face total destruction. As Theseus watched the lottery that would select this year's victims, he saw something that would haunt him forever. The faces of parents watching their children's names being drawn. The quiet courage of young people accepting their fate. The way an entire city had learned to live with systematic injustice simply because it seemed impossible to resist. But Theseus had not spent his youth studying strategy and leadership to stand by while others suffered what he could not prevent. As the lots were being drawn, he stepped forward with the kind of quiet authority that marks true leaders. "I volunteer," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the harbor. "Take my name instead of whoever is chosen next." The crowd gasped. Here was a prince, heir to the throne, offering to take the place of a common citizen in what everyone assumed was certain death. King Aegeus rushed forward, finally recognizing his son and horrified at the prospect of losing him so soon after their reunion. "My son," the king pleaded, "you cannot throw your life away on a gesture. Athens needs you here, alive, to lead our people to better days." But Theseus had already thought through the strategic implications of his choice. "Father," he replied, using the title publicly for the first time. "A leader who will not share the dangers he asks others to face is no leader at all. These young people are not dying for Athens. They are dying because Athens has accepted that some problems cannot be solved." He turned to address the crowd directly, and in his words they heard something they had almost forgotten. "Hope. I do not go to Crete to die," he declared. "I go to solve a problem that has plagued our city for too long. If there is a way to kill the Minotaur and escape the labyrinth, I will find it. If there is a way to end this tribute forever, I will discover it. And if I fail, at least I will have failed while trying to protect our people rather than hiding behind my royal privilege." The ship that had always carried only victims now carried something different. It carried a strategic thinker who understood that every impossible problem was simply a puzzle that hadn't been solved yet. As the black sails filled with wind and the tribute ship departed Athens, Theseus made a promise to his father. "When I return victorious, I will raise white sails so you can see from afar that your son comes home in triumph rather than defeat." The king watched until the ship disappeared beyond the horizon, not knowing whether he had just witnessed the bravest act of leadership in Athens history, or simply said goodbye to his son forever. The palace of King Minos was a wonder of the ancient world. Vast halls supported by red columns, walls painted with dolphins and ancient symbols, courtyards where light and shadow danced together in patterns as complex as the king's own mind. When the Athenian tributes were brought before the throne, they faced a ruler whose power was absolute and whose justice was terrible. Minos had built his kingdom through strategic thinking and naval supremacy, but the death of his son had turned his wisdom into something darker. "So," the king said, his voice carrying the authority of one who ruled the seas themselves, "Athens sends me another group of young fools to feed my pet. Tell me, which of you believes you can succeed where so many heroes have failed?" Theseus stepped forward, and something in his bearing made even the powerful Minos pay attention. This was not the demeanor of a victim, but of a strategist preparing to negotiate. "Your Majesty," Theseus replied, "I am Theseus, son of Aegeus, and I have not come here to die, but to solve a problem. Your Minotaur has been fed for years, but the tribute system serves no one well. You get temporary satisfaction, but permanent enmity from Athens. We lose our young people, but learn nothing from their sacrifice. Perhaps it's time for a different approach." The king's eyes narrowed. He had expected fear, pleading, or bravado, not strategic analysis of his own policies. "And what approach would you suggest, young prince?" "A final test," Theseus proposed. "Allow me to face the Minotaur according to ancient laws of single combat. If I die, Athens will double its tribute for the next generation. If I succeed, the tribute ends forever, and our kingdoms can find more profitable ways to interact than through mutual hatred." From the shadows of the throne room, Princess Ariadne watched this exchange with growing fascination. She'd seen dozens of tribute groups arrive over the years, had watched brave young people go to their deaths in her father's labyrinth. But she had never seen anyone approach the challenge as Theseus was doing, not as a victim accepting fate, but as a strategist proposing solutions. King Minos considered the proposal. The arrogance intrigued him, but more than that, the logic appealed to his own strategic mind. "Very well," he decided, "but understand the terms clearly. The labyrinth was built by Daedalus himself, the greatest architect who ever lived. It is impossible to navigate without guidance, impossible to escape even if you somehow kill the Minotaur. You will enter at dawn, and by sunset, you will either emerge victorious or join the bones of all who came before you." As the guards led the tributes to their quarters, Ariadne made a decision that would change the course of history. She had watched her father's justice become vengeance, had seen too many innocent lives lost to a cycle of retribution that served no one. In Theseus, she saw not just a brave prince, but a strategic mind that might finally break the pattern. That night, as Theseus prepared for what seemed like certain death, he had no idea that help was coming from the most unexpected source. The daughter of his enemy, who possessed the one thing that could turn an impossible challenge into a solvable problem. As midnight struck and the palace slept, Theseus heard a soft sound at his chamber door. When he opened it, he found the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, Princess Ariadne, daughter of his enemy, offering him something more precious than weapons or armor. "I have watched you," she said without preamble, "and I believe you are different from the others who have come here to die. They came with strength or courage, but you came with intelligence. That gives me hope that you might actually succeed where they failed." Theseus studied her carefully. In the strategic thinking that had become second nature to him, he recognized that this could be a trap, a way for King Minos to test his character or learn his plans. But he also recognized something else, the look of someone who had been carrying a burden of guilt and was finally ready to act. "Why would you help Athens' champion?" he asked. "What do you gain by aiding your father's enemy?" Ariadne's answer revealed the depth of her own strategic thinking. "Because this cycle of tribute and death serves no one," she replied. "It makes my father more bitter each year. It robs Athens of its future, and it stains Crete's honor with innocent blood. A true victory would end the cycle, not perpetuate it." She held out a ball of golden thread, spun from the finest silk and blessed by the gods themselves. "This is not just thread, it is the key to the only strategy that can succeed in the labyrinth. Daedalus designed the maze to be impossible to navigate by memory or mapping. The walls shift, the passages lead back on themselves, and the very air inside confuses the mind. But," she continued, "every labyrinth has one weakness. It is still a physical space with a center and an entrance. Tie this thread to the doorpost as you enter. Follow it inward, dealing with whatever challenges arise, and when you are ready to return, the thread will guide you back to the beginning." Theseus accepted the thread, but more than that, he accepted the wisdom behind it. This was not about being rescued by someone else's magic. This was about being smart enough to accept help when it was offered, strategic enough to use the right tools for the job, and humble enough to recognize that every hero needs allies. "And what do you ask in return?" he inquired, knowing that in negotiations, everything had a price. "Take me with you when you escape," she said simply. "I have spent my life watching my father's justice become vengeance. I want to help build something better, somewhere that values wisdom over retribution." In that moment, Theseus understood that he had found not just an ally, but a partner whose strategic thinking complemented his own. Together they began to plan not just his survival, but the end of a conflict that had poisoned relations between their kingdoms for too long. "If we succeed," he promised, "you will not just escape your father's palace. You will help me build a kingdom where intelligence is valued over strength, where problems are solved rather than simply endured." As dawn approached, and the time for the labyrinth drew near. Theseus prepared for battle, not just with weapons, but with the most powerful tool any hero can possess: a well-thought-out plan and trusted allies to help execute it. The thread was more than a navigation aid. It was a symbol of the connections that make victory possible, the relationships that turn impossible challenges into solvable problems. As the sun rose over Crete, Theseus stood before the entrance to the labyrinth, a doorway carved from black stone that seemed to swallow light itself. The walls rose higher than any building in Athens, disappearing into shadow above, and from within came sounds that made even brave men's hearts falter. The crowd that had gathered to watch this latest sacrifice fell silent as Theseus tied Ariadne's golden thread to the doorpost with careful precision. Every knot was deliberate, every loop tested for strength. This was not the hasty action of a man rushing toward glory, but the methodical preparation of a strategist who understood that success in complex challenges depended on getting every detail right. "Behold the Prince of Athens," someone in the crowd mocked, tying string like a child preparing to play a game. But Theseus understood what they did not, that every complex problem required the right tools and the wisdom to use them properly. Strength without strategy would only get him lost faster. Courage without intelligence would only get him killed more impressively. As he stepped into the labyrinth, Theseus felt the thread uncoiling behind him, like a lifeline connecting him to the world of the living. The first thing he noticed was how the very air seemed to change once he was inside. Thicker, more oppressive, filled with a sense of ancient malevolence that went beyond physical danger. The passages were wider than he had expected, clearly designed to accommodate the Minotaur's massive frame. The walls were smooth stone, offering no handholds or landmarks, and the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. Most disturbing of all was the way sound behaved inside the maze. Echoes came from unexpected directions, making it impossible to judge distance or direction by hearing alone. Theseus began to understand why so many heroes had failed. They had entered this place thinking it was a simple matter of finding the center, killing a monster, and finding the way out. But the labyrinth was not just a physical challenge. It was a psychological one, designed to break down the mental discipline that navigation required. Every turn looked like every other turn. Every passage seemed to lead deeper into the maze, without offering any sense of progress. The thread behind him was the only proof that he was actually moving forward, rather than simply walking in circles. He forced himself to maintain the strategic thinking that had brought him this far. At each intersection, he paused to observe, to listen, to think rather than simply react. He noted the subtle differences in the stonework, the way air moved through different passages, the almost imperceptible slope that suggested he was gradually descending toward the center. The roars of the Minotaur grew louder as he progressed, but Theseus refused to let them hurry his pace. This was not a race. It was a problem to be solved methodically, step by step. with intelligence guiding every decision. As he went deeper into the labyrinth, following the thread that represented his connection to wisdom and preparation, Theseus reflected on what this challenge really represented. Everyone faced labyrinths in their lives, complex problems with no obvious solutions, situations where the path forward was unclear and the stakes were impossibly high. The secret was not to panic, not to rush, but to trust in preparation, to accept help when it was offered, and to remember that every maze, no matter how complex, was still just a series of choices that could be navigated with patience and strategic thinking. Behind him, the golden thread traced his path like a record of careful thought. Each step proof that wisdom and preparation could triumph over even the most impossible challenges. At the center of the labyrinth, in a circular chamber lit by shafts of sunlight from high above, Theseus found what he had come seeking. The Minotaur was even more terrible than legend described, a creature with the body of a giant man, but the head of a bull, muscles rippling with supernatural strength, eyes red with eternal hunger and rage. The floor of the chamber was littered with the bones of previous heroes, each skeleton a testament to courage that had not been tempered with strategy. Some still clutched broken swords, others wore armor that had been crushed like papyrus, all evidence that strength alone was not enough to defeat this monster. But Theseus had not come here to engage in a simple contest of strength. He had spent his journey through the labyrinth observing, thinking, preparing not just for battle, but for victory through intelligence. The Minotaur charged as soon as it saw him, moving with shocking speed for something so massive. But Theseus was ready. Instead of meeting the charge head-on, as every previous hero had done, he rolled aside at the last moment, using the creature's own momentum against it. The monster crashed into the stone wall behind where Theseus had been standing, its horns striking sparks from the rock. In that moment of confusion, Theseus struck, not at the heavily muscled body, but at the tendons of the creature's leg, using precision rather than power. The Minotaur roared in pain and fury, spinning around to face this opponent who fought unlike any of the others. Where previous heroes had tried to match its strength, this one was using strategy, speed, and tactical thinking. "You are strong," Theseus called out as he dodged another charge. "But strength without intelligence is just destruction. I have come not to destroy you, but to end the cycle of death that you represent." The battle that followed was not the clash of titans that bards would later sing about, but something more subtle and more profound. The victory of strategic thinking over mindless violence. Theseus used every lesson he had learned about reading opponents, about patience in combat, about turning an enemy's strengths into weaknesses. Each time the Minotaur charged, Theseus was somewhere else. Each time it tried to corner him, he found an escape route. Each time it relied on brute force, he responded with intelligence and precision. Gradually, the monster began to tire. Its charges became less coordinated, its roars more desperate. The creature that had been fed on human sacrifice for years had never learned to fight an opponent who refused to meet violence with violence. When the moment was right, when the Minotaur had exhausted itself with fury and frustration, Theseus struck the decisive blow, not with overwhelming force, but with perfect timing and precision, ending the creature's torment and the cycle of sacrifice it had demanded. As the Minotaur fell, Theseus felt no triumph in its death, but rather relief that a problem had finally been solved. This had never been about glory or proving his strength. It had been about applying intelligence to end suffering. Standing in the center of the labyrinth, surrounded by the bones of heroes who had tried to solve this problem through courage alone, Theseus understood a profound truth about leadership and problem solving. The greatest victories are not won through superior force, but through superior thinking. The most important battles are not between strong and weak, but between wisdom and foolishness. Now came the greater test, finding his way back through the maze that had trapped so many others forever. But as he turned toward the passage, where his golden thread disappeared into the shadows, Theseus felt confident for the first time since entering the labyrinth. He had proven that with the right preparation, the right allies, and the right strategy, even the most impossible problems could be solved. Following Ariadne's golden thread back through the labyrinth was like retracing the path of strategic thinking itself. Each turn brought Theseus closer, not just to freedom, but to understanding how preparation and wisdom had made the impossible possible. When he emerged from the maze, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, he found Ariadne waiting with ships already prepared for their escape. She had not spent the day in idle worry, but in making practical preparations for the success she had helped make possible. "The Minotaur?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Dead," Theseus replied, "and with it the tribute system that has caused so much suffering. Your father will have to find new ways to process his grief, and Athens will have to find new ways to relate to Crete. But the cycle of sacrifice ends today." Together, they freed the other Athenian tributes and made their way to the harbor. Behind them, the palace of King Minos was beginning to realize what had happened, that his impossible challenge had finally been met by someone who approached it with intelligence rather than just courage. As their ships sailed away from Crete, Ariadne stood beside Theseus, watching her homeland disappear beyond the horizon. She had given up everything familiar, her royal position, her father's court, her entire way of life, to partner with someone whose strategic thinking matched her own. "Do you regret it?" Theseus asked, seeing the thoughtful expression on her face. "I regret the necessity," she replied. "I regret that it took bloodshed to solve what diplomacy should have handled. But I do not regret choosing wisdom over tradition, strategy over sentiment, partnership over position." For days they sailed together across the wine-dark sea, planning the future they would build in Athens. Ariadne shared her knowledge of Minoan architecture and navigation, while Theseus described his vision of a kingdom governed by strategic thinking rather than arbitrary tradition. They were more than lovers. They were intellectual partners whose combined wisdom was greater than either could achieve alone. The princess who had provided the key to the labyrinth and the prince who had used it strategically were preparing to revolutionize how kingdoms could be governed. But fate had other plans for their partnership. When they stopped at the island of Naxos to resupply their ships, something happened that would test everything Theseus had learned about honor, duty, and the sometimes terrible complexity of making strategic decisions when personal desires conflict with larger responsibilities. On the island of Naxos, as Ariadne slept peacefully on the shore, Theseus faced a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. During the night, he had received a vision from the god Dionysus, who revealed that Ariadne was destined to become his divine bride, to achieve immortality and a happiness greater than any mortal marriage could provide. But the vision came with a terrible requirement. Theseus must leave her on the island, abandoning the woman who had saved his life and made his victory possible. It was a test of whether he could make decisions based on larger strategic thinking rather than personal desire. Standing on the deck of his ship as dawn broke over the peaceful island, Theseus struggled with the most complex decision of his life. Every instinct of honor and gratitude told him to wake Ariadne and take her home to Athens, as he had promised. But the divine vision suggested that her destiny lay along a different path. In the end, he made the choice that would forever mark him as a leader, capable of strategic thinking even when it caused personal pain. He sailed away, leaving behind the woman he loved because he believed, rightly or wrongly, that it served a greater purpose. When Ariadne awoke to find herself alone, her first emotion was not just abandonment, but the terrible realization that even the most strategic thinkers could make decisions that seemed cruel from limited human perspective. She had saved the hero, only to be left behind when her usefulness was finished. But the gods had their own sense of justice. As she wept on the shore, Dionysus himself appeared, not as a distant deity, but as a divine being who recognized her worth and offered her something no mortal man could provide: immortality, eternal happiness, and a love that would never fade or abandon her. Theseus sees only the strategic necessities of the moment, the god explained as he placed the crown of stars upon her head. But I see your true worth, not just as a helpful princess, but as a woman whose wisdom deserves to be honored for all eternity. Ariadne's story became a reminder that even when human strategic thinking fails us, the universe has its own way of ensuring that wisdom and kindness are ultimately rewarded. Her constellation still shines in the night sky, a testament to the idea that those who help heroes achieve greatness deserve their own recognition. Meanwhile, Theseus sailed toward Athens, carrying both victory and the knowledge that even the best strategic decisions could have consequences that were difficult to live with. He had solved the problem of the Minotaur, but he had also learned that leadership sometimes required making choices that no amount of strategic thinking could make painless. As the Athenian ships approached their home harbor, Theseus stood at the prow, scanning the familiar coastline with mixed emotions. He had achieved the impossible. The Minotaur was dead. The tribute was ended, and Athens was free from Crete's demands forever. But his victory felt incomplete, tainted by the decision he had made regarding Ariadne. It was then that he noticed something that filled him with new horror. The ships still flew the black sails they had carried to Crete. In his emotional turmoil over abandoning Ariadne, he had forgotten his promise to his father to raise white sails as a signal of victory. This was not just a matter of protocol or ceremony. King Aegeus had spent every day since his son's departure watching from the cliffs above Athens, looking for the first sign of whether Theseus would return in triumph or whether the ship would bring only news of another heroic failure. From his vantage point high above the harbor, the old king saw the familiar black sails approaching and felt his heart break. For months, he had dared to hope that his son might be the one to succeed where so many had failed. Now, those hopes were crushed by the sight that had greeted him so many times before, the return of the tribute ship carrying news of death. In his despair, King Aegeus threw himself from the cliff into the sea that would forever after bear his name. He died believing that his strategic, brilliant son had failed like all the rest, that the impossible challenge had claimed another hero, that Athens would continue to pay its terrible tribute to Crete. When Theseus reached the harbor and learned what had happened, he understood that his greatest victory had also become his greatest failure as a son and as a strategic thinker. He had planned meticulously for every aspect of his mission, except the most basic requirement of leadership: clear communication with those who depended on him. The hero who had navigated the most complex labyrinth ever built had failed to navigate the simpler challenge of remembering to change his sails. The strategic mind that had solved the problem of the Minotaur had overlooked a detail that any common sailor would have remembered. As he knelt beside his father's body, Theseus learned the hardest lesson of leadership: that success in great challenges does not excuse failure in small responsibilities. That strategic thinking must extend to every aspect of our commitments, not just the dramatic ones. This was not a failure of courage or intelligence, but of completeness, the reminder that true strategic thinking must account for every detail, every promise, every person who depends on the outcome of our decisions. The crown of Athens now rested on the head of a young man who had learned that the greatest leaders are not those who never make mistakes, but those who learn from their failures and ensure that the cost of their learning is never again paid by those they love. From that day forward, King Theseus ruled with a wisdom tempered by loss, understanding that every decision a leader makes ripples outward in ways that cannot always be predicted, but must always be considered. Theseus, who ruled Athens in the years that followed, was a different man from the young prince who had volunteered for the tribute ship. He was a king who understood that true strategic thinking must balance courage with wisdom, action with reflection, and personal desires with responsibility to others. He established new forms of government that relied on collective wisdom rather than royal decree alone. The man who had learned to navigate the labyrinth through preparation and assistance created institutions that would help future leaders make better decisions through consultation and careful planning. Under his rule, Athens became known not just for its warriors, but for its strategic thinkers, men and women who approached problems with the same methodical intelligence that Theseus had brought to the challenge of the Minotaur. The city became a place where complex problems were seen as puzzles to be solved rather than fates to be endured. Theseus never forgot the lessons of the labyrinth, that every complex challenge could be navigated with the right preparation, the right allies, and the right strategic thinking. But he also never forgot the lessons of his failures, that strategic thinking must be complete, that communication is as important as planning, and that the cost of leadership's mistakes is often paid by those who trust us most. He established schools where young people learn not just the arts of war, but the arts of strategic thinking, how to break complex problems into manageable parts, how to seek wise counsel, how to prepare thoroughly for challenges, and how to think several steps ahead of immediate obstacles. Most importantly, he taught that true heroism was not about individual glory, but about solving problems that benefited everyone. The hero who had ended the tribute to Crete created a kingdom where the goal was not to dominate others, but to find solutions that served the common good. In his later years, when visitors came seeking advice about seemingly impossible challenges, King Theseus would tell them about the golden thread, not as a magical solution, but as a symbol of the strategic thinking that could guide anyone through any labyrinth. Every problem, he would say, no matter how complex, has a center and an entrance. Find the right thread of logic, prepare thoroughly, accept help when it is offered, and trust in the strategic thinking that has served humanity since we first learned to plan ahead rather than simply react. The labyrinth that had once symbolized impossible challenge became, under his teaching, a symbol of hope, proof that with the right approach, any maze could be navigated, any problem could be solved, any challenge could be transformed from an obstacle into an opportunity for growth. And so Theseus learned that life's greatest labyrinths are navigated not through strength or luck, but through strategic thinking, careful preparation, and the wisdom to accept help when it is offered. That every complex problem has a solution for those patient enough to find the right thread of logic to guide them. Let this ancient wisdom of strategic thinking settle into your heart as you drift towards sleep. Let the golden thread of intelligent planning guide your dreams, reminding you that whatever challenges tomorrow may bring, you have within you the same potential for strategic wisdom that turned an impossible maze into a navigable path. Rest now, knowing that every complex challenge is simply a problem waiting for the right strategic approach. Every labyrinth is simply a puzzle that can be solved with patience, preparation, and the wisdom to seek guidance from those who have walked these paths before. Sleep the sleep of strategic thinkers and wake with the wisdom of Theseus.